Right, kia ora koutou. Morning everybody. Let's resume the hearing of PC 9. We're into day 8, 9, I think. Yes, right. Now, you may or may not be aware that there was a power outage in the building earlier and still out, so we're running on generators. So a modicum of disrobing is acceptable. If it gets too warm in here, feel free to remove some clothing. Yes, right. Okay. Anything? Nothing, panel? Right, well, first up today is Mr. Manning. Welcome, Mr. Manning.
Chair, Councillor, Commissioners and others. I'm actually probably shooting myself a bit in the foot by raising issues and criticisms regarding this plan change, because it actually appears to be a bit of a job creation scheme for planners. Anyway, you've got my history as part of my initial written submission.
Oh, indeed.
But yeah,
am I correct in thinking that you might be a supporter of the Chiefs?
I'm a good supporter of the Chiefs.
Right.
Yeah, you remember me from previous, with the same shirt on. So anyway, I actually finished my town planning degree prior to the RNA being enacted, and I had a couple of temporary jobs up in the Auckland region prior to starting work as a regulatory planner here in 1992. And at that stage, Hamilton had a transitional district plan, and we're really finding our feet around what was a controlled activity, et cetera, et cetera. And I'll come back to that point later on. So the main focus on this sort of oral presentation is on two aspects of my submission, that being the character areas and the historic heritage areas and the notable trees. And I'll also make some general comments about the process. So dealing firstly with those general sort of process matters, the overall question I'd like you guys to ask yourselves is who actually benefits from the provisions that are being created, and who should bear the cost of compliance? And that's sort of a big important theme for me right throughout this. So my submission was critical on the Council's Section 32 reporting, which I believe in simple terms should consist of an analysis of alternative approaches to achieving what Council wants. The staff report notes that they consider the S32 robust. I actually disagree. There's a couple of examples. Nowhere have I found evidence on determining the cost of Council maintaining notable trees through their own arbour crews versus the ongoing cost of analysing resource consents, actually the costs of us all being here, or the associated reports that went into all this. There's huge costs. I'm sure that would pay some arbour guys for quite a considerable number of years to have a roster of maintaining notable trees. And another example is also with the heritage areas, heritage houses. There's substantial consenting costs around that, and also the people actually have to maintain those properties as well, and maybe rates relief those other avenues, or reduced fees on building consents. Zero cost to resource consents might be an avenue of assisting. Because like in general, many people are really supportive of the heritage provisions, and there are probably a lot of people that have made submissions, including wanting their own houses protected or their own areas protected, but they don't actually realise that it comes with a cost on them, and I think that's really important, and it's a cost that other people that don't have heritage items don't have to bear. Yeah, so because of the high cost in compliance, work on maintenance of protected trees, or indeed houses, just might not be undertaken, and that will result in the actual original rationale for the protection disappearing. And that's particularly the case with trees, when there's an unusual scoring method for how trees are to become protected. So mentioned about housing renovations. Like, I'm aware of properties in Hamilton East that are purposely being left unmaintained because they'll lose they'll basically fall down and then they'll be able to replace them with 3 townhouses, etc. So that it's, yeah. That's not all related to the cost of compliance, but it partly is. You know, part of my drive for making a submission was that from discussions with an elderly friend in Hamilton East, and she actually felt that the rules were great because she wasn't going to have 3 townhouses next to her. But she lives in a 1970s duplex unit. It's actually one of the ones in photos later on. I'll come back to it. And the house next door to her is falling into disrepair. And ironically, even though her house doesn't have any heritage value or character because it's in the heritage area, if she was to put a conservatory on out the front, she'll have to go through a resource consent process at quite considerable cost. Heaven forbid that she wants to replace her hedge with a fence. Yeah. So with regarding the issue around fencing, I really, if you drive around parts of town that are in the existing heritage areas, I've made submissions 20 years ago around requiring resource consent for fences, and there's a hell of a lot of fences that have gone up that I dare say haven't had resource consent. So I just really wonder about the council's monitoring of their own rules, and surely that's actually one of the prerequisites of establishing rules, actually finding out what's out there in the first place and what's going on. I haven't followed up on asking how many resource consents for fences have been issued over the last 10, 15 years, but I dare say there's far less than actually non-compliant fences have been put up. So back when I started at Hamilton City Council under the Transitional District Plan, the Franklin Railway Village Heritage Area was part of the planning provisions, and at that time consent for alterations on dwellings within the area were a controlled activity. The residents of the area, when that rule was brought in, were actually promised some Victorian street furniture, and council was going to do things in keeping with the historic nature of that precinct. Council was done really squat. And at that stage of controlled activity, initially we just had a one-page checklist. It got ticked off, and it was free. Then we brought in a $80 charge, which $80 seems like nothing, but for a lot of the residents in that area who were promised that these provisions weren't going to cost them anything, $80 was a lot. I can remember going to see a chap who wanted to build a garage, and he, in my face, basically, if council wants me to live in a museum, they should be paying for me to live in a museum. And you know, and that was, you know, a blue-collar worker. So the photo up there actually shows 2 different properties in that Franklin Railway Village zone. They both had garages added to them, and I'm not being disparaging about either because I think that both properties look tidy. I actually am a good friend of the chap that owned the bottom house, and I actually applied for resource consent for that garage out the back, and he took the trouble of getting weatherboards run in the same profile as the house, which was a huge expense. The roof, you can't really see, but the roof of the garage has got the same little I don't know what you call it, the ridge line with the other butting ridge line joining up to it as the house. It's a bit ironic that probably back in the 1920s people didn't have double garages and cars, but I mean that garage is built totally in character and went through a resource consent process. The other garage, not being negative about it, it's probably in similar character, but it's a skyline type garage with steel cladding, and I probably approved many of those when I was a regulatory planner in that area. But it just again shows they had to go through a expensive process. To me, the outcome for the second garage is far better than the outcome for the first one. As I noted in, sort of moving along, as I noted in my written submission, I actually believe that the identification of the historic heritage areas is also somewhat flawed, both in the extent of the areas and the inclusion of properties with little or no historic merit. And what I would sort of suggest is a bit of a random process. The pictures that you've got in front of me, I actually live in Hillcrest Road, and I just chose Hillcrest Road. It's an established road. It's one I live in, so I'm familiar with it. The elderly lady that I mentioned previously, she lives in Wellington Street, which is in the Hamilton East Heritage Precinct. So the photos show dwellings on Hillcrest Road that don't have any level of protection. And a lot of these are just from street view, but the top house, it's an Art Deco dwelling on the corner of Hillcrest Road and Cambridge Roads. It's actually being extended at the moment, which doesn't show up on that, and the extensions are being done totally in keeping with the Art Deco style. And they didn't go through resource consent to do that because it wasn't in any heritage protection area. They realised the value of keeping it in character. I mean, I actually live in a 97-year-old house on Hillcrest Road. I know the ongoing costs of maintaining an old house. It's got working sash windows that the breeze is blowing, the curtains blow. It would be just about impossible to make it up to the current healthy living standards, but I'm not seeking for Hillcrest Road to be added to the Heritage Precinct, but it's just an example of how there's a bit of a mismatch between what someone values in an area or what individual houses may well be. I touched on the fencing issue before. Again, I just think rules around fencing, unless they're enforced, are a nonsense. Flicking through actually my house, the bottom one. So the bottom photo there, that's a hedge that's in front of two 1970s duplex units. The photo above that is actually the house next door. That hedge complies with the current standards, but the elderly lady that owns it doesn't really feel safe behind the hedge. But if she wanted to put a security fence up there, she'd have to go for an expensive process, while the house next door is falling to a state of disrepair that its character within probably 20 years will no longer exist. And that's just some other examples of contemporary dwellings within that heritage precinct. I've used Hillcrest Road with some character dwellings that don't have any layer of protection to show a whole lot of differences between the area that a similar length of road within the heritage area that are protected, that many dwellings don't have any of the value that attributed to the area yet. Even though they're not heritage buildings, if you go to do an addition on them, you have to go through an expensive resource consent process. And I mentioned before about the notable trees and the fact that the lack of maintenance due to the cost will lead to the trees deteriorating to an extent that the ARB score in some cases will actually be reduced where the tree, to such a state where the tree will no longer be worth protecting. I think it's the STEM system that's used for protecting trees in Hamilton, and it's just a multiplier. You take off the condition of the tree, which might have been a 5, drop that down to a 1, and all of a sudden the level means that it's not worthy of protecting. So that's why notable trees need maintenance, but should that cost be borne by the individual and who actually benefits from it longer term. So to sum up, there must be better ways to achieve the objectives of the plan within Plan Change 9. I believe that the measure proposed in many instances will be counterproductive unless you're a planner working towards a pension. As noted in my written submission, costs associated with compliance should not be the responsibility of the property owner, but should be shared with the wider community, if indeed it is that wider community that has the enduring benefit.
Thank you, Mr. Manning, and thank you for the photographs and the very clear identification of where they are and so on. I mean, that's quite helpful for us when we drive around and have a look at places. So.
Yes, I mean, the theme of what you presented, which is, you know, focusing historic heritage on the best and most consistent, is something that we've been, you know, grappling with over the last couple of weeks. I think your photos are, you know, at that very basic visual level emphasise.
It was done very quickly too, just to give two different examples.
You think your photos along Hillcrest Road, are they reasonably representative, or have you really, and I'm not being critical, have you chosen the best examples and saying?
I mean, to be fair, I probably have chosen the best examples, but there is Hillcrest Road. It runs up to the Waikato University. It's my old hunting ground basically, so there is a lot of 50s housing stock there, some of which I haven't bothered taking photos, but generally speaking, the houses are probably overall in a better state of repair than a lot of the ones in the Hamilton East
and Wellington Street
area. And I haven't touched on any of the other areas in Hamilton. Actually, when I'm talking about it, about the whole cost thing, I mean, one of the expert witnesses had an experience of the UK model. When I was many years ago, I played rugby over there. I actually worked for a building firm in Cardiff, and we were engaged by the Historical Society or the Heritage Trust. We actually maintained listed buildings, and the Heritage Trust paid for that maintenance. There was some provisions that I think you had to make your house available or your castle or whatever it was available for 1 or 2 days for the public to go through, but the ongoing maintenance costs weren't borne by the individual property owner, they were borne by a trust set up to look after them. So I'm definitely not against protecting heritage. It's
No, that's understood. But so if the cost issue is somehow resolved, do you have an issue then with the HHAs? You still have an issue with the HHAs. I'm just trying to work out whether you're arguing both of those elements.
The cost issue is paramount. The identification of some of the houses, I think are completely wrong. If it's not a character house, you shouldn't have to go through any type process. The activity status, I know some of my colleagues believe that RDAs are the new controlled activity, which just get the rubber tick, but they don't necessarily, they shouldn't. And there's a huge cost of engaging professionals to put that application together. So yes, if that activity status was altered, if you had more rules that for permitted activities around what you could do to a character house without just basically having blanket renovations, RDA consent, that will certainly help. But yeah, basically incentivising people to maintain their notable tree, or to maintain, or have someone maintain their notable tree, or maintain their house of character without having to bear the costs themselves. Because, I mean, as I said, I live in a 97-year-old house that's not listed. I could have sought to be listed, and it probably has a lot more merit than a hell of a lot of houses. It was bought by a notable architect back in the day. But no way do I want it protected. I'll do my own maintenance.
We have noted the address. Yes.
What, sorry?
We have noted the address.
Yeah, I mean, I'll do my own, as long as I live, it'll be kept in character, but without the added compliance costs.
Yeah, right.
No, it's very clear, thank you.
Yeah.
Very clear, very
Thank you,
helpful.
Mr. Manning. Appreciate your time and the effort that you put into that. That's great. Right, next is Domus Aquarium, Natasha Middleton. No? Okay, then in that case, let me just go down the list. Is Marion Francis here? Thank you.
Okay.
490. Naylor Street. Yep. Right. Thank you, Ms. Francis. If you just tell us what you want us to hear.
Good morning. We live at 33 Naylor Street, my husband and I. We also own 31. 33 is already built heritage. The house is between 135 and 140 years old. And the adjacent building on 31 is probably a similar vintage. I submitted on the matter of small scruffy buildings and the burden of resource consents. So when we bought the property some 9 years ago, we were unaware that there were any rules about ability to knock down small scruffy buildings. So we did. We knocked down a tiny little building that the Bora held together. And it was a dirty old outhouse. We have got another small building sitting on the property, and it seems to me incredibly onerous that you expect us to apply for a resource consent to deal with a grotty little scruffy old coal shed. And it defies logic, actually, that you can't put a rule in there that says we can deal with very small buildings in a really simple way. Why do we need a resource consent to demolish something that's not bringing any real benefit to the beautiful aspect of our property? It's a frustrating aspect of dealing with council that sometimes you can't get good practical answers. So there are two possibilities. One is that you make a rule about those simple scruffy dwellings, those simple scruffy buildings, they're not dwellings. So in our case, it's an old coal shed, and you permit us to remove them based on a floor area or something similar. The alternative that you face is that we won't spend on it. We'll do exactly what my previous speaker said, which is we just won't spend until it totally falls down, and in the intervening period it looks awful. We haven't done that, we've just painted it. The other possibility is that you could set up a desk of common sense in Hamilton City Council, and we would have the ability to walk in with a photograph and say, this small scruffy building, we want to deal with it, can we please? What can we do? And we could get an answer on the spot, and we didn't have to spend thousands of dollars and pay for consultants to deal with it. So that's item one. And it's a money issue, just like my predecessor, but it's also a practical issue. It's a burden.
I like that idea. I mean, it's very 1984, isn't it? Desk of common sense. It's a very nice idea.
There's not a lot of it around. It's not that common sense. And I'm not asking you to let us modify our main heritage building. I'm asking you to think about those various houses all through the area. And I note that you're looking at Jellicoe, that whole area. There will be a lot of small, scruffy buildings. And the logical thing is let people remove them, because it improves the aspect and the presentation of the precinct. And don't make it too hard for us, please. Right, the second item that I submitted on, and I really struggled. I'd have to say there was so much paper to get through to work out what the impact was for us. We did come and speak to council, but I honestly found it seriously challenging. And I can read, and I'm capable, but there were thousands of pages to get through. Yeah. My concern is is about the HHA areas and what happens on the boundaries of those. So I've sat there and studied where we live in our built heritage and where the HHA boundaries are and what happens on those properties adjoining the HHA boundaries. Now, where we live, 2 of the 3 properties that bound us are owned by landlords, and there will be the possibility for those properties to be demolished, even if they're in HHA. And my understanding is they can now go up 2 stories, correct?
Well, that's to be determined. Yeah.
To be determined, yeah.
Yeah.
So once you go up further, it's three dwellings, 3 stories, is my understanding. My concern is, have you put in place a mechanism so that people like us who are impacted by developments on those properties are notified and we have the right to speak? I couldn't find that anywhere. I can see that you've imposed the requirement for consents, be it building consent or resource consent, but I can't see evidence that we've actually got some rights about what goes on next to us. And if we're in a heritage area and we have all the burdens attached to that, which is the cost of maintaining the property, the inability to develop it significantly, and the importance of the overall presentation of a really beautiful heritage precinct, then the other side of that is that council should recognise that they have obligations to us. We're putting in the money and the energy, day by day, week by week, month by month. Our rates burden is significant. And the other side is that council should respect us, and council should be willing to ensure that we are notified when things are going to happen on the properties around us that will affect the beauty and style of our heritage area. We don't particularly want big buildings looking over into our yard. That's a very NIMBY attitude, I know that. But we paid, we bought, we maintain, we care for those properties. And I think the contra is we do have some rights. So I'll put that one back to you.
Thank you.
The other thing I noticed was when Dr. Knott wrote about what was going to happen out beyond those HHA boundaries, he wrote in a relatively a non-specific way about how the development would occur. And I just wonder whether there can be a graduated approach so that we don't end up with 3 stories, 3 dwellings directly adjacent. So we have, possibly you could have considered 2 zones, the HHA and then a buffer zone, and then the area where we get 3 stories, 3 dwellings. I looked at things like the overlay height and the setback standards, and I felt they could have been graduated so that the character and the presence of those HHA areas is maintained. And I asked myself, have you allowed sufficient breadth to permit a graduated increase in density and height? And I don't think you have. I think we're going to go from one thing to the next thing. As simple as that. And gradually, as we intensify, it will be immediate, and we can actually see that where it's happening already in parts of along Firth Street. You can see it.
I mean, that's obviously one of the issues on our table is whether I guess the first issue is whether the boundaries are appropriately drawn. I mean, there's many arguments for saying that you should take boundaries out to roads because that's a natural break between things. But then there's another argument that says if you do that, you include more people whose properties actually don't quite fit. So we're balancing that particular issue.
Yeah, and I mean, I can accept that because there will be property owners who will have bought with the intention that it's an investment and they're then capped because all of a sudden they've ended up in an HHA region, and that definitely applies to our neighbours. And somehow you have to find a position of balance, and you've got a bit of a tightrope to walk. Good luck.
We're good on tight ropes. Yeah.
That's good. I'm getting too old for tightropes.
I don't lift mine off the ground.
Oh, okay. Yeah, and on that aspect, my concerns were issues of light, privacy, historical presentation. So you build quite tightly around us and we lose our light and our privacy. We're very open to the road, so to some extent privacy doesn't bother us. We love the community, and for us that's a really valuable attribute, and we wouldn't want that to change too much, and you intensify it and that will change. Notable trees was another matter that I looked at. We have what was on the original drawing, a notable tree on the Firth Street boundary. Now, when I picked through yesterday, I think it's been removed, and I don't know why. But it appears to have been struck off. So I just want to make some general comments about notable trees. Those notable trees are generally on council property, which is the boom. In Hamilton City, the council does not maintain the boom. We maintain the boom. We have an enormous amount of boom on our property. And this week I went out and there was a huge log down on the boom on Firth Street out of that tree. And I set to, and I'm the one that sawed it up and loaded it in the trailer and took it to Green Waste and paid the Green Waste fee. Now my concern is, where is council in that process? Because if you're going to designate trees notable, you must maintain them. You must assess them regularly. You must put arborists through them and remove the dead wood. And I remind you of what happened in an Auckland city crash, where there was not adequate monitoring of trees and the tree came down and killed a child, correct?
Yep.
So if you're going to note them, you must maintain them. And you mustn't just have a program that says you're maintaining them, you must have people out there doing it, because at present I'm doing it. And I'm getting a bit old to go up the ladder with the chainsaw. They need to be pruned, and they also need to be assessed for rot and damage. So we had a beautiful tree on our own property which we had assessed for rot and damage, and it had to come down. So that has to be happening with those notable trees. They can look all right, but they can be rotten inside. Second question is, does the council plan to have adequate insurance cover for those notable trees? Because if you note a tree next to a very old property in a heritage area, and the tree comes down on our house, and the cost of renovations to our house is significant, then our insurance company will want to talk to your insurance company, or it will want to sue the council. So please make sure. I couldn't find any evidence anywhere that you had a plan to insure those notable trees, but you will need it. Thirdly, I wasn't sure whether you had taken account of the impact of climate change and weather patterns and extreme wet on some of those trees you were designating notable. A lot of introduced trees don't do well in really soggy soils. The root systems are not strong and sturdy, and a lot of the trees that you have noted are introduced species. So I just remind you that the world is changing around us, and we need to make sure we take account of that. And I'm not sure whether the tree assessors did that or not. finally, on notable trees, someone pointed out to me that had that Firth Street tree continued to be notable, it would have impacted what we could do in our backyard. So we couldn't put a swimming pool in there because the RPZ or PRZ, not sure which it is, I think it's
PRZ.
changed its name, PRZ.
Yeah.
The PRZ is such that it impinges into our backyard significantly, and that would have impacted our ability to build over it or put a swimming pool in it. Given the cost burden of maintaining our old house, I don't think either of those things are going to happen, and I think you've lifted the notation on that tree. So I'm not commenting on some of those in relation to that tree, I'm commenting broadly.
Yeah. Yeah. And many have made that same observation, so thank you for that. That's it.
I'm done. Do you have any questions?
Thank you, Ms. Francis. I should just clarify that this panel is an independent panel of commissioners. We're not council, but I didn't stop you upbraiding us with your comments. That's fine. They've been heard, so that's fine. Any questions?
Just, thank you, Mrs. Francis. Just on the transitional space, which you talked about, we're very much alive to that, but that's probably going to be an issue for the Plan Change 12 in terms of the interface between, I mean, if you are on or close to a boundary between areas that are able to be intensified and those that are protected by historic heritage, for example, that will be an issue for examination at that time.
Good.
So in terms of like height and access to daylight and that sort of thing, take your point on that.
But certainly, as I said, the boundary, I mean, boundaries or the interface either between zones or between different prescriptions is a very important consideration, obviously. Yeah.
I think it was very clear and helpful.
Very clear.
Just one comment. The preceding speaker talked about the resource consent burden and cost. That needs to be softened because the cost of those consents is such that people will do things without going through the consent processes.
Yeah.
And the mechanism needs to be more at the level of council than being pushed to resource consent, because people will make a pragmatic decision if the rules are too hard. The rules need to be easier to work with.
Yeah. And at the same time, as you say, there's an issue of immediate neighbour notification and interest in what's going on. So there's a very fine balance always between those sort of two factors.
Yes, and one of the issues you have with immediate neighbour notification is the majority of people are not very interested, and they'll go, oh, there's a bit of paper in my letterbox bin. But those of us who do end up owning those heritage properties, we do read what happens, because we've realised over time that failure to places us in a really challenging position. So we need to read and be aware of what affects us.
And you're evidence of that, because if you hadn't read, you wouldn't be here. So yes, you're your own demonstration. So thank you for that.
That's all right, thank you.
Has Natasha Middleton arrived? No? Who has? David Sorensen. I recognise you again.
Recognise me once I got that off, right? Okay. Yes. This is to do with SNAs on two properties that we live at one, and other family members live at the other. It's submissions 282 and 287. We're representing both of these properties, and I'm putting it all in one document because it's similar. We've lived at one of them for over 30 years. 2/3 of where we are is a gully area, and so most of that was became an ECNA or proposed ECNA. We appreciate though that the boundaries on the proposed ECNA on both properties have been adjusted as per the statement of evidence from Hamish Dean. We support the boundary changes because they recognise the existing gardens, grassed areas, fruit trees, structures, and alleviate many of the concerns we'd raised in our submissions. So both properties have large areas of land that would still be included in the ECNA. So it's only a portion of it that is that we can continue to maintain as gardens and orchards and
And
that
these
kind
are
of thing.
13 and 22 Taniwha Street, aren't
Yeah,
they?
no, one's Far Street,
Far Street.
yeah,
Okay.
and the other one's Taniwha, just to,
Thank you.
yeah. I don't know whether you've got copies of my
We do,
things
thank you.
with the maps at the back.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. They're from Hamish Dean's report. We appreciate also that council was added in, as in Hamilton City Council, to what is now in Chapter 20, Natural Environments, 20.2.3b, to encourage communication between landowners, Department of Conservation, iwi, council and other organisations that can assist in the management, protection and restoration of significant natural areas. Council was omitted from that list and we felt it would be necessary that they be involved as well. However, we oppose public paths, walkways and cycleways being put through ECNAs for the following reasons. One of them is a disruption to fauna and flora by building and maintaining public walkways and cycleways. The idea is good to allow the public through those areas, but there's quite a few things that are a negative in that. Okay, one is the disruption of existing things that are there. Larger old and dead trees can be a danger to the public. They're ideal bat roosting places. We don't have bats there that we know of in the area, but we did have tui in some pretty big trees. We had 2 large poplar trees there that are probably might have been 50 years old, and not the recent storms, but a year before that in February, 2 of them came down. Fortunately, they landed in the gully, not anywhere else, or in that region of and they spread across not just our property, but the next 2 as well. So they were fairly lengthy trees. Now, public access down there, and shallow rooting poplars and wet weather was not a good combination. We now have a little lake there, kind of lake pond, where the trees came from because the water continues to seep through the ground there that they used to get nourishment from. The other thing is the possible increase of dumped litter and larger rubbish in and around ECNAs with increased public access. We went for a walk a few weeks ago along Seddon Road, which is by the back boundary of our property, and there's a public footpath along there. I counted 3 supermarket trolleys, 4 tyres, bags of rubbish, plus your regular bottles and coffee cups and everything else down there. And then a few days later we saw a council truck there. There was actually, I think, 5 supermarket trolleys that they took away and a whole lot of other rubbish that was cleaned up from there. And one of the things, it's bad enough now the litter we get round the streets because we're not far from the stadium, and after a rugby match inevitably there's things over the side down there or even round our street where people park. And also children coming home from school. There's a few dairies along the way where they spend their money and drop the litter of what they've eaten afterwards. So you add that to the ECNAs and it increases an awful lot of work in keeping them in the kind of condition that you want to encourage trees, plants, animals, everything to exist there without creating too much more work for everyone else. Potential antisocial behaviour through there too in an ECNA. Even without walkways, there's been enough over the years that we've been there to, from people growing marijuana crops to, yeah, all sorts of things happening down there. It's pretty good at the moment. The negative impact of increased lighting in and around ECNAs, particularly on bats and more pork-ruru. We used to hear a lot of them, and we commented a few, you know, like you'd hear a number of them in different parts calling to each other during the night. But then for quite a while we hadn't heard any, and then the other morning I heard one about 5 in the morning. But since then we haven't heard any again, so they're looking for a mate or something, and there's not the ones that were there. For a while we had a lone tui, and then there was eventually a family. Unfortunately, they had their nest in the poplar trees. And there's still tui round, but they're definitely not nesting there that we can see at the moment. Dr. Mueller's statement of evidence, 14th of April 2023, pages 8 and 9, mentions these kind of issues, or some of the issues that I brought up. This is her statement. Shall I read what I've got there? And
We can, right, over to you, but I
Yeah.
mean, we can read it, we can take it as read if you want to.
Okay. It's just some of those kind of things that she mentions in going through that report. So if, however, public paths, walkways and cycleways do go ahead in an SNA, we maintain that any private property should not be crossed by the SNA, by the walkway, or distinction should be made between public land and private land by fencing it, and adequately fence rather than just a wire and a few posts. But something like, for instance, even without a walkway there, we've got a plum tree, the base of it would be about that, so big round, and it used to spread from one side of the property to the other down in the gully, probably planted by the original owner. We're the third owner of that property, and we bought it off our landlord who'd bought it off the previous owner. But anyway, that tree was there. We used to get a lot of fruit off it. One year, absolutely every plum was gone. There was not one on the ground. It wasn't birds or rats or anything like that. And then we found some two-legged rat. Their evidence was plastic crates. And that was without public access down through there, just exploring. Okay, so there should be some sort of distinction, and preferably fencing, between private property and a walkway, if that goes ahead. They would need to be closed at night for public safety, which would be a very difficult thing to do, but if note is taken of the not having other public lighting through there, it's just, well, it's just not a good idea. A plan would need to be put in place to manage rubbish and potential antisocial behaviour. So my feeling is, and my wife's feeling, and some of the others around about, is just keep the walkways out of those kind of areas. That's all from me.
Thank you, Mr. Sorensen.
Rightio.
Yeah, I mean, understand the issue that you're raising. It's not peculiar to this place. It's an issue that arises with walkways all around the country.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
Understand the issue.
Yeah.
It's a very hard one to do anything about. But
Yeah, let's see any ideas.
No question for me, thank you.
No, okay.
yeah. All right. Thank you
Thank
again.
you.
Thank you. And we're going to Laura Beelby next, please. special pleading on this case. Yes, right.
Thank you. It's not actually me who's presenting, I'm just here for support.
Right. Now, so 4.
Seats are low.
Yeah, they are very low.
Must feel like people. A little bit well known, yeah, long bodies.
Right.
Good morning. My name's Fiona Bealby, and with me today is Laura, my daughter, who's really just here for support and to answer if I can't answer any questions.
All right,
Give me a
thank
bit
you.
of a hand.
And you're talking to us about Fairfield.
We're talking to you about Fairfield.
Yep.
I hope you don't mind if I read mine rather than ad lib.
That's fine.
It just gets through it quicker and
That's all right.
I don't forget anything then.
Yep, thank you.
Okay, my name is Fiona Bealby, and I'm a trustee of the Fiona Bealby Family Trust, which has owned 89 Fairfield Road for about 12 years. This house is an ex-state house which is largely intact, except for a large concrete block garage at the rear of the property visible from the road. Whilst I support in principle what the council is trying to achieve in preserving our Hamilton heritage, I believe that in the case of Fairfield Road, the horse has well and truly bolted, and I find it difficult to see any reasonable justification for this street becoming a historic heritage area. Excuse me, I'm a bit nervous.
Try just take a deep breath. And slow down, that's often the way.
Oh, right, okay, thank you.
Right, yep.
I do not doubt that this street was once a fine example of intact 1950s state houses. However, this is no longer the case. Over half the properties in Fairfield Road have either been removed and replaced with modern dwellings or have been altered in some significant way. To put this in some kind of perspective for the Commissioners, and within the short time that I have today, I would like to tell you what you would see if you were to walk with me down Fairfield Road today. What you would see is that out of approximately 48 original state houses on Fairfield Road, around 28 have been changed to such an extent that the overall look is neither original nor authentic. You would see that the altered dwellings are not concentrated in one particular part of the proposed historic heritage area, but are dotted throughout the area. As I said in my written submissions, this dilutes any architectural and historical value of the area that once existed. You would see several dwellings that have been removed and several lots have been replaced by brand new dwellings or multiple dwellings. I refer the Commissioners to photos 1 and 2 in my written submission, which I believe you've
Yes, we do,
got there.
thank you.
You would see subdivided sections with newer or often quite basic dwellings clearly visible from the street. I refer you to photographs 4, 5 and 6 in my written submissions. You would see a completely empty lot where at least 2 intact ex-state houses on neighbouring sections have recently been removed and now the land stands undeveloped. I refer you to photograph 9 of my written submission. You would see several dwellings where the original facade has been altered or structural renovations have been made that are clearly visible from the road. You would see, or rather you wouldn't see, several houses because they are obscured by high fences that have been erected since the 1950s. The Council's heritage expert even acknowledged in his initial report that the high fences were, and I quote, very dominant discordant features, unquote, of Fairfield Road, and the Council has, in my submission, failed to properly consider and give weight to this. What you are left with are approximately 20 remaining simple weatherboard, stucco and shingle type dwellings that may meet the heritage criteria. However, all of these houses, including my own, are substandard in build and quality. Indeed, many are quite clearly degraded. In order to be considered suitable for 21st century living, they would need considerable upgrade and investment. It is my submission that the additional costs being imposed in order to meet the heritage compliance standards will be prohibitive for most owners of these properties. According to the Council's expert report, Consistency in physical and visual qualities is a key part of the assessment. Consistency in street design, development density, lot size, style and street frontage. However, when you look at the pictures of this area that I've included in my submission, you would be hard pushed to say that this is an area of consistent development. Yes, some of the original unaltered houses remain, but they are the minority and are not clustered in such a way that you could say there is a consistent streetscape. The Council should not ignore the following very salient facts when determining whether Fairfield Road really warrants heritage status. These are that 58% of the houses in Fairfield Road have been altered significantly and do not meet the criteria. So we're not talking about 1 or 2 houses, we're talking about a lot of houses. That a significant portion of the houses that remain are in a substandard state, and that the Council is not making best use of this land, which is in close proximity to the CBD and is on an existing bus route. On the topic of experts, the Council, through its own submissions, has identified that many submissions, like my own, were not supported by expert evidence. That is true. However, I don't believe this should mean that my submission carries any less weight and should be overlooked. Heritage experts are particularly hard to come by and costly, and real-life experience from people living in the area can, in my view, be of immense value, particularly when on the topic of heritage, which can be appreciated and understood by lay people. While I would like to reiterate my support for the preservation of our city's heritage, a decision to make Fairfield Road a historic heritage area will unreasonably restrict development of an area that lost any heritage value it did have a long time ago, and that is also well located to assist with addressing our national housing shortage. And finally, historic heritage areas are intended to represent a period of Hamilton's development and help tell a story. While this street may have told a story 20 or 30 years ago, when you walk the street today, it is extremely difficult to understand what story the Council is seeking to tell by imposing these restrictions on the street. Thank you.
Yes, Sylvie, anything to add?
No, nothing to add from me, thank you.
Can you just tell me the number of Fairfield, the trust property?
Sorry, 89.
89, thank you. Right. So you're towards the eastern end of Fairfield, right? All right, thank you. I've got no questions.
No, that was very clear. Helpful, thank you.
Yeah.
No question.
Well done. You've.
That's a bit disappointing.
You don't have questions.
Would you like me to ask you a question?
Yeah. No, you passed, so you can go now. Yes,
Okay.
thank you. Right.
Thank you very much.
Do we have Jane Landman here or Patsy Briggs? Right, Ms. Briggs. Is he now? Okay, thank you.
I'm here just for a support person.
Okay.
Right. So you're Patsy Briggs or Patsy Ryan? I see two names, one on the submission and one on the slides.
Yeah, so I've returned to my maiden name,
Right.
but at the time I was Briggs when I put my submission in.
That's right, you don't need to explain
So
it.
not confusing.
You're Patsy Ryan now. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yep.
Good morning, everybody. My name's Patsy Ryan, / Patsy Briggs. I'm here to support my application to oppose the HHA for Seifert Street, which is located in Forest Lake. I'm a resident of the street, and I'm here on behalf of my family, which is made up of 2 preteens and a teenager and a fur baby. We understand the importance of preserving historic identity for our city, and this isn't definitely something we've taken lightly. Speaking here today is something that's really taken me, as you can tell, out of my comfort zone, but it's well worth it, and just to indicate how passionate I am about this, and the implications on us as a family if this is locked and loaded. So I'm about to put together a presentation that I'd like to share with you.
Sure. And I don't think we've had anyone from Seifert yet, so it's good to have somebody from that HHA. Thank you.
That's good. So before we get started, I will be sharing a short video. I apologise for the quality of it. The video does not do the street justice, but I just wanted to walk you through what the street looks like and for you, if you could take away something from that would be awesome.
Yep.
So just in my opinion, Seifert Street is one of the best streets in Hamilton. Not only for the homes, but the people that live there. We've got an amazing little community. We get together and have barbecues at each other's houses, and so we're very respectful, and it's a lovely street. We all do our bit and all endeavour to improve and care for our properties. Don't get me wrong, although I oppose the HHA, I don't want to see one of our homes go on the market and a cashed up developer comes in and says, oh, we'll just put some apartments on there. That's not what the street is about. It is a beautiful street. But yeah, we just need some common sense, and you'll see why I feel like this later in the presentation. So we're starting on the left-hand side of at the top of the street. It's actually a cul-de-sac. So you'll note that a lot of these homes have painted brick. Different roof profiles have been added. Some of them are in better condition than others. You'll notice some aluminium windows have been added to quite a number of these properties. Some are still weatherboard. It obviously comes down to the cost of what that resident can afford. Properties with cedar added to the front to add an architectural interest. Large, massive conservatories tacked on the front. This property here is painted with a massive deck that was council granted consent out the back. So we're coming to the top of the street here. Down that driveway, that house there has had a unit added completely onto the side of the house. We come back round.
You're going back down the street now?
We're coming back down the street now. Yeah, apologies for the sun.
Don't apologise for the sun.
I know, I should apologise. Yeah.
It's a brave person who takes responsibility for the sun.
Yeah. So a lot of these houses have got alterations done to these properties that aren't visible from the street. There's a massive amount of those properties that have got huge conservatories added to the rear of the properties, decks, properties that have had big garages added. Yeah, so we've just come into the end. So it's quite a quaint cute little cul-de-sac. Incredible people live there, one being myself. Okay, so what I've done here, this is an extract from a peer review prepared for the City Council by Adam Wild from Archifact. So in this report that was done, based on the material he's been able to consider, of the 32 proposed HHAs advocated, he believes that the following 12 areas don't warrant inclusion into the district plan. And I'd just like to note that Seifert Street is on that list. Another peer review done by Dr. Kai. Dr. Kai is an architect and planning at the Auckland University and has done many researches and reviews and is obviously clearly respected in his field. I'd just like to make the note of part of that extract is the heritage place or area needs to have a direct association or relationship to a person, a group, institution, event or activity that's of historical significance to the Waikato or the nation. So in cases in which a historical association is difficult to establish or is repetitive, HHA status may be removed. Seifert Street does not meet any of Dr. Kai's heritage value criteria based on that.
So who was Seifert?
Seifert was a gentleman that just owned the land and the street was
subdivided.
named after him. Yeah.
Thank you.
So here we have a picture of 31 Garnet Ave. So Garnet Ave is at the top of the cul-de-sac. If you're driving down, it's on the right-hand side. So it's quite ironic. While the HHA talks about Mr. Seifert, Hamilton City Council have excluded the Seifert family home. On one roof is built in the 1930s from the HHA, despite being adjacent in the street. So this means that there's no direct association for the rest of the street. Clearly, if the Seifert family was significant and part of the heritage values, their house would have been included, but this house has not been included. So clearly they are insignificant and have no direct association. There's been reference made to houses in the street being considered as from pattern or plan books. Acacia, Ashbury, Lamont and Seifert HHAs all have references to houses from plan books or pattern books in revised Schedule HD. There's no explanation as to why this is of heritage value. There's no explanation as to the plan books the house designs come from, the designs, and what the plan book you think the houses are and why this makes them important. So conclusion is, as a result, these plan book HHAs have no direct association with or relationship to a person, group, institution, event or activity, and that is of historical significance to the Waikato or the nation, which Dr. Kai states in his peer review as a requirement of the heritage area. All of the New Zealand plan books that we viewed, whether designed by a draftsman, a woman designer or an architect, have a variety of designs. The point of them was to offer many designs so people could find one that they wanted. As such, it's impossible to define a house, a group of houses, as being similar to a plan book unless there being identified one specific plan and one specific plan book. Based on that theory, in 50 years' time, will all homes by Jenny Homes or G.J. Gardner be considered to be historical heritage for this reason? In our street, 50% of the street's homes are not in their original state in one way or another, as you will have seen with added conservatories, aluminium joinery, painted brick, and auxiliary units added to a home. So, thank you for sticking with me. The first section of the presentation was a bit more of a factual, theoretical portion. So now I'm about to kind of dive into the emotional aspect of this presentation, which affects us directly. So a bit about us. We bought the property in October 2012. I can't believe how fast time's gone. And shifted into this property in 2019. There was a four-stage project dreamt up and was initiated in 2019. Stage one of this property was a complete internal gut renovate, was completely rewired, insulated, aluminium joinery, as you can imagine, some of the old windows. We have children, so we were just not warm. It was not nice. We got Code of Compliance from Council that was granted in June 2021 when this first stage was completed. Stage two, we've added a 9x4 metre heated swimming pool to the rear of the property. Having 3 children, it was just something pretty special. So stage 3 is a house extension. We have a growing family, we have teenagers. The house, yes, is amazing, but in its state, it doesn't function well for us. And then stage 4, once this is completed, there will obviously be the landscaping, which will be sympathetic to the environment and the local wildlife. We get a lot of tuis and lorikeets and that coming through from the reserve where the water world and everything is. So I'd just like to show you the effort that we've gone to improve on this property. On the left obviously is the before, which was a little pokey little kitchen. Afterwards, once we lifted up all the linoleum and revealed these amazing matai floors. So you can see that we appreciate the originality of the home when we're not taking away anything and putting in new stuff. There was these amazing covings that we've carried on through the home. It's just beautiful. Again, the bathroom was basically the size of a hot water cupboard. So afterwards, there we've done a complete overhaul. We've done a floor-to-ceiling tiled shower, new vanities, new bath. It's just gorgeous. The living room. So before probably your parents or you've been in a home that's had carpet that's looked just like that. You know, that's pretty.
Yep.
It's cool, but it's just not us now, you know. And then after pulling that carpet up, there's all this beautiful matai floors that we've restored. So you'll see here what it looks like at the moment. Our stage 3 is to renovate and add more square footage to the house to provide for our family. So what we're proposing is to, in stage 3, is to, we've gone down the track and they've done so before all this paperwork came through, is to add on a master suite, a second lounge, sitting room, a 3rd bedroom and a garage. So the footprint of the new extension replaces where the old garage is and the old driveway. This is all within the council regulations, the 5 metre setback covenant for the street, and so we're not taking up any more additional green space. So to date, so stage 1, doing the renovation to the property, we spent $220,000 doing this, so it's no small investment. Stage 2, which was the swimming pool, was $90,000. Stage 3 to date, we've spent $35,000 on engineers doing reports. We've had surveyors in, obviously the architect. We've got full drawings from the architect, and obviously our mental and emotional health on this has been at 110%. So we're quite a way through this before all these letters come in the little box about the changes that we're going to be imposed with. So this is our dream home. You know, we're not a developer. We're doing this for our family. There's the sayings, home is where the heart is, and our house, our castle. You know, it's these are all phrases that resonate with us, and it is really important. Okay, so the implications for us as a family, I just wanted to illustrate what these changes mean for us. So under the current structure, since these letters arrived, we would require to get a professional to come in and help us with a resource consent, which would be focused on the heritage classification. And that's, from what I can find, at least $2,000 plus to get that done. We've also been advised that we would need to get an environmental study and report prepared. So at a basic is $1,800 plus. So I guess the more you pay, the better report you get, the more chances of this being granted. But this is all money and things that we hadn't bargained on when we started this project. So the emotional impacts on us is obviously financial. We've invested a heck of a lot of money in this. The delays on the build has come up and is costing us every day. So inflation, we've got a mortgage like everybody else, and they're pretty scary at the moment. Then that's not to mention the implications on our builder that we had booked in, like he had other jobs to be done, and we had a booking, and now everything's kind of gone out the door. We need this home to work for us as a family, and at the moment it's not. We've got a teenage girl and her brother sleeping in the same room. That's not fair. And we'd gone through these plans with the kids, and obviously that they were super excited, you know, for kids to have their own bedrooms and a bit of space and be able to invite their friends around. And that's what the pool and everything that was to help that along the way. So we're a modest family. We're just wanting to build a better life for ourselves. At the end of the day, I guess since we've spent all this money and come to this point, we still don't know whether this will be a reality for us. It's like opening a can of worms. You start somewhere and we don't know when it's going to finish and what this is going to cost for us. We just want this to feel like a home and not just somewhere we live. The street is amazing, you know, and we're not, in my opinion, we're not destroying the look of the street. The street is so different now. There's no consistency from one home to the next via what we've talked about, the painted brick, the aluminium joinery. There's a few homes that have got different roof profiles now, so there's no originality. And I don't believe that what we're trying to do or achieve is actually going to affect the street in any way. It's actually going to improve the street and add value to other people's properties at the end of the day. So that kind of concludes my presentation. I invite you to come and drive down the street. Come in for a coffee, come have a look. I'll even bake a cake, you know. For us, what we want to see is some common sense, like everyone before me has talked about this, you know. There needs to be provisions put in place. We're not against HHA, you know. I don't want someone looking in at my teenage girl sunbathing on the deck, you know, in reality that could happen. But we need to be able to maybe have somewhere, since we are so far through this project, we need somewhere we can walk in, sit at a table with somebody and go, look, this is what we propose. It's goddamn beautiful. Can there be a provision where we can move forward with this? Because at the moment we can't. We're too scared. We don't want to open a can of worms and spend a whole heap of money, and how much more are we going to have to spend? I hope this has been quite straightforward and has given you guys an insight into the street, into us as a family, and that you guys can go away and feel confident that you can make the best decision for the street and for us and the region as a general, yeah.
Thank you, Ms. Ryan. Appreciate the presentation and what you've told us. Just one question, and it's a bit of a side issue, but I'm assuming that your stage 3 would require resource consent anyway? Or?
That's what, no, because
it's fully contained, it's fully permitted?
Yes.
Okay,
yep.
That's good to know.
Yes, thank you for your time and effort putting things together.
Thank you.
It's obviously, the uncertainty is obviously weighing on your mind.
Yeah, it's stressful. Yeah.
I mean, so in a general sense, do you, for Seifert Street, do you see the street changing, or does it you be more favoured towards it staying pretty much like it is?
There's obviously properties in that street that are in a bit of disrepair, are tired. So they're, and going forward, there's going to be situations where they need to upgrade windows and make changes. And for future living, you know, we live different now than we lived 50 years ago. The houses need to
I'm thinking more of a step.
evolve.
Yes, I'm thinking more of a step change to different housing typologies up and down the street.
A lot of them are been there for a long time. The people on that street have been there for a long time, so they're own operator type scenario. Guys, you know, there's a couple of guys, older guys down there that've been there for 50 years. You know,
So are you saying that it's likely to change? You feel it's likely to change?
No, I don't necessarily. As Patsy was saying, I think like everyone likes that street. There's a great community there, but it just seems to have swung too far, and for case by case thing, as it should be. When the heritage letters came out, it was under my understanding, or at least the understanding, that it was going to be just to stop that, exactly what she's talking about, the big 3 stories. I mean, already we're talking about 6 stories from Garnet Ave to the Turapa Road there, you know, going ahead whether that will happen or whether people have got the capacity to do that. It's kind of a little bit left field, but...
Yeah, so I mean, it's just that, you know, with or without the HHA, obviously the HHA would have the effect of keeping it much more like it is at the moment.
Yeah,
I guess that's the implication,
there's
not just rules for you, obviously it's the rules for your neighbour. You have to consider everything, don't you, in terms of the whole street.
Yeah.
And I think that's where I think that's where she's asking for the balance. She's not extending over those boundary lines. It wasn't until literally a couple of years ago this wasn't an issue at all. And I understand where you're coming from because I think it's very important, and we all do. But there's got to be some sort of balance there as well.
Okay, thank you.
So just to clarify, it's not necessarily the HHA you object to, it's the rules that come along with the HHA. So if there...
It's implications of it now. You know, there's so many costs associated, and it's scary. It's really scary. I mean, some of the documents that have come through and the readings, it's like, oh my God, the wording of it just scares the shit out of me. You know, and I'm not silly, and I do read well, but some of the stuff is just completely over my head. It just scares me.
So with stage 3, you've got all the plans drawn up, but you hadn't lodged for building consent at the time.
That's correct. Yeah. Because then we were all of a sudden resource consent, you know, and it's like, where do you start? Yeah. And then also the environmental study and everything like that had to be done. And yeah, it's just, I thought, well, what do I do? Do we sit back and wait and talk to you about it and see if we can make some common ground, or do we fire ahead? But we can't fire ahead. We can't afford to do that. Just, where does it stop and where does it start?
Well, it's probably not helpful to tell you this, but I should tell you this, that we have the third part of these hearings in the back end of the year. So our decision on this, which if it went in the way that you're asking, would take the HHA off so that those rules didn't apply, or the other way around. That decision's not going to be out until much later this year, I'm afraid. So there's quite a few months ahead.
Yeah.
Okay.
No questions. You're very clear.
But thank you for the presentation, both of you. It's really, I mean, that's great. And we have not, as a panel, been down Seifert, but we will before the end of this process.
Yeah.
So, thank you. I think. Right. Shall we push through? Right. I will push through. So next we have Rajat Bakshi. Thank you. That's 3. Thank you, Mr. Bakshi, and I gather you were here the other day, but we just didn't get to you in time, so
yes,
our apologies for that.
Yeah, I actually was here and then got a call from McKinley that my child was sick, so I had to leave urgently.
Things better now?
Yes, he's doing all right. He's still at home, but yeah, he's doing all right.
Okay, that's good.
Thank you for having me here again today and giving me your valuable time to listen to my appeal towards our first home, 36 Marshall Street, Fairfield, Hamilton, which me and my wife bought it 2 years ago and is now shortlisted as a heritage property. Which, when we bought this property, according to our pockets and bank's limited approval, we were having no good option except to buy this as our first home. That time, we have checked with the council, and due to the age of this property, this house was not falling, hence the reason we bought this property. Also, as per our agent, if you can see to the pictures, The house property have 2 to 3 extension in the past, which as per current view, it shows that there is no sign of any heritage structure. The extended kitchen on the right hand side and the extended room on the front left side, the central part has been modified with the aluminum doors. Also, there's a double garage has been made on the beginning of left side, which blocks half of the front view of the property. Also, I would like to bring your attention towards our health and safety issues as well. 2 time burglaries happened in last 6 months into our home. When we first bought this home, when it was the first incident, they jumped out of the fence and break into our cars and took my spare keys from the car where we were sleeping inside. When we called police, they came, they couldn't find anything. Second time, they opened the entry gate, which is small in height and easy to open from outside. They came in while CCTV cameras were there. They didn't even care and took my Honda scooter, which we just recently bought it. The footage has shaken my kids, and they're not feeling safe to go out when there is a little dark, and they don't even want to leave their belongings or toys outside when after 5 or 6 o'clock. When we complained to the police over the phone for the second incident, they did not even bother to come home and just send me an email stating that they will not investigate this further, but will keep this in a record for future references. Afterwards, I have been to Hamilton City Council and appeal if I can extend my fence. But the lady who she served me said you can extend up to 1.8 meter. But at the same time, I made her very clear that this is considered as a heritage structure. Can I still extend it? She then paused and took my details. Later, a supervisor or senior staff from council contacted me through a phone call and said that I cannot do anything. All I wanted to ask you a question: if council cannot help me, police cannot help me, where in this world I can go and ask for help? We also caught a guy who was hiding, who basically jumped out of the fence and hiding near the bushes on the front fence. When I asked him, the answer was he's playing hide and seek. I was very scared that night that I didn't even approach him and told him to get out. Respected commissioners, me and my wife have 2 kids. As mentioned, one is 3 and one is 5, whom I cannot take them outside to the street for cycling and not even to the park, which is next to my property. Reason behind that, we have noticed many times roaming dogs on the road, on the pathways, without any supervision and honors. I have called animal control people, complained about these roaming dogs in past as well. Neither my kids are safe inside because people have thrown many times empty beer bottles, stones and objects from the park, from the outside of the street, which has resulted to the broken glass of our windows twice, which had cost me to get it fixed. Also at that occasion, my son got injured from the broken glass of a beer bottle when he was playing in our back lawn. Luckily, it was not a major cut. So I have informed this incident to the Hamilton City Council, where they just apologized and said that they cannot help me in this matter except to pick up the rubbish which was illegally dumped in the front of my property. And they also will not cover any cost to fix my windows. I would like to ask you one question. Where can I take my kids to play if they can't play at home and they can't go to the park or cycling to the street? We have noticed that the park next to us have crushed beer bottles, so hence the reason I cannot take them to that area as well. With my current circumstances and the fear of my mind, where we have to check our property every single hour when we are out and about for work, After facing all these troubles, we decided to get rid of this house and go back to rental properties, as we have put this property into the market since last 3+ months. But due to the house considered as a heritage structure without its heritage look, no one is willing to buy, even though whosoever made the offers, that was literally rubbish, that it will make me bankrupt. They're not even offering me the value which we have bought it for. Also, with the recent bad weather condition, our roof started to leak. After calling a roofer, he showed me that roof required heaps of work, as internal wood need to be replaced. So we end up installing the new roof at the back of the house, which it was leaking from, as it was required. We also wanted to renovate our tiny kitchen, as you can see on the picture, which was extended, and the old bathrooms as well. But again, we cannot consider it right now with the current circumstances. So now we are stuck in a situation where we cannot even renovate and cannot even move from this property. In a nutshell, me and on behalf of my wife, I request you to please withdraw this property from the heritage list, as you can see, or make me clear if I'm wrong, if this is considered as a heritage property. My neighbor next to me, he even laughed other day, said, where is the heritage structure? And I said, I really don't know. I would like to request you to please visit my property and do a fair decision, so that we can further plan for renovations accordingly as per our dream home, and live happily with our kids and make their childhood memories in this house until they are kids and staying with us. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bakshi. We have actually been to Marshall Street and Oxford Street we've been to Oxford Street a couple of times and Marshall, and certainly walked around the park and back through Marshall, so we're aware of where your property is. When you say that people jumped over the fence, are you talking the front fence or the side?
The front fence.
So,
The front.
so there's no intrusion from the side. It's always from the front. Right. Okay. All right. Well.
No questions, thank you.
No questions. Thank
Oh
you.
yeah. Sorry to hear the state that you're in at the moment, but yes. Thank you for coming. Huh?
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yes. Dr. Bang. And we had some submitters on Harrowfield yesterday, as you're probably aware, so we're attuned to the request.
Thank you very much. I believe you have my
Yes,
submission in front of you. Would you like me to read that in?
Well, you don't need to. You can just freewheel on it if you like.
Okay, well, yes, I'll freewheel this.
Yes, right.
The residents of Harrowfield Drive were alerted to Plan Change 9 quite early, and I was approached to see whether or not I could represent them at this hearing. Excuse me, please. And I'm happy to do that, being a resident of Harrowfield myself. I've set out who and what I am in the preamble to what I've said in the thing. I have got a couple of witnesses to call. Both have brief evidence. Both have lived in the street almost since its inception. In fact, they were among the early people to live and to build and to live there. I'd just like to emphasise before I call them that Harrowfield is a nice little enclave separated from the rest of the city by Wairiri Drive and the gully system and so on. It has a number of streets radiating off the main street. It's well designed, one way in, one way out, and the street is double carriageway with a median, and you've probably visited it anyway. And I'd urge you to do that again.
Thank you.
You may even find cups of coffee about the place.
We're immune to bribery, Dr. Bang.
Thank you. May I call Mr. and Mrs. Miller, please?
Thank you. Mr. Miller.
They have brief script of evidence to
We
share.
might need another chair. Can we get another chair?
I'm happy to stand if you like.
We're happy for you to sit, I think that's...
Now I've got
Copies?
While that's being distributed, Dr. Bang, are you able to clarify where on Harrowfield Drive you live?
Sorry?
Are you able to clarify where on Harrowfield Drive you live?
Yeah, number 6.
Number 6, thank you. It just helps us to bring the picture up on our computer.
Thanks, Steve. Right.
Thank you very much.
So who's going first?
Okay,
Right, Mr. Miller, thank you.
Yes, my name is Martin Miller and I reside at 8 Bedford Place, Harrowfield, and I give this evidence in support of the request to make the Harrowfield suburb an historic area. The position was, when I was transferred up here from Wellington in January 1987, and we were looking for an area to build a new home, and we came across Harrowfield, and at that time Harrowfield had only just been released about September 1986, and at that time we felt Harrowfield was unique not only because of the residential sections were well above the average size, but because the subdivision at that stage was more or less the end of the city. It was sort of like out in the country. So we purchased the section in May 1987. We went direct to the developer, Graham Robinson, and once that was accepted, we then proceeded to have plans prepared by architect Peter Chibnall, who in fact designed 5 houses in Harrowfield, and they're all different designs. An agreement with the developer was that we had to present our house plans for his approval, as he did not want substandard homes built in the subdivision. And this is why today, if you've been up to Harrowfield, you've seen the quality of homes that have been built.
We haven't done a formal site visit yet, but we will be doing one.
Okay,
yes, thank
yeah.
you. Yeah.
I would just like, as Phil and I are probably we were one of the first residents in Harrowfield, and we've now been there 35 years as we moved into our house in April 1988. But if I can just elaborate a little bit about the history of Harrowfield. Graham Robinson was the developer of that subdivision, and it was his dream. He wanted to see residential sections that were not small. At the same time, he introduced quality control and strictly prevented proliferation of townhouses, a legacy the future residents would capitalise on. So, as I said before, it was opened up around about September 1986, and it was made very clear on anyone that was purchasing a section that if you wanted to cross-lease or build a substandard home, then big letters, don't buy. That was his vision. And at that time, when we signed the agreement to purchase the section, there was a solemn commitment to adhere to those rules, and according to what I've read, there was a severe financial penalty. So I don't know what that meant. We understood that there was going to be a caveat put on each of the titles of the property to say that you wouldn't be allowed to subdivide, but that never eventuated, as we understand.
Yeah, some other residents told us about that yesterday.
Did they? Yes.
Yeah.
Following on from that, in 1990, Graham Robinson, developer, donated a very large part of the property to become a park for the residents of the area. And in September 1990, the Hereford Club Incorporated was formed and registered through the Incorporated Society, his company's office. Robinson had in mind to put tennis courts there. It was even envisaged to have a clubhouse, which never eventuated. So what happened following that was the owners of sections could join up to the club and became foundation members by paying a sum of $500. And the initial stage 1 and 2, that was not part of it. We were part of that stage 1 and 2, and we had to pay out $500. But everything that was developed after that, Graham Robinson took out $500 from each of the sections he sold and passed it on to the club. And the club used that fund to put in the tennis courts and all the other children's playground and everything like that.
That was a life membership fee, was it, in effect? Because we were told yesterday it was $100.
That's the subscription.
That's the subscription to join.
For each year.
Right.
This was a one-off payment, and you became a foundation member of the Hereford Club. And that $500, you don't get that back if you sell your property. That passes on. For instance, if you came and bought our house, you would then become a foundation member. That foundation member goes on to the owner of the property.
Yeah. Right.
But what you were alluding to was that there is a subscription of what's gone up to $110 in the last year. That's just to join the club and have the facilities to help the club financially, really. Way back in 2017, there was the debacle over the proposed development of 29 Harrowfield Drive, when the residents challenged the large development that was proposed. This was a very large section, I think from memory about 7,000 square metres. And the initial plan that horrified the residents was that there was going to be 20 to 22 houses put into this area. So there was quite a lot of meetings. I think we had about over 30 meetings in our house in that year, and we had the hearing here with the Commissioner in September 2017. Overall, the objection was defeated and the development proceeded. I think there's now 26 homes there, and to be honest, it's a disaster for the community. Since there, in the last 12 months, there was a resident in Longwood Place, which is the street that runs off Hereford Drive. That was demolished, and 4 very small townhouses have been put on that one. And just this year, on the corner of our street at Bedford Place and Hereford Drive, there was a very nice home there, well constructed by a reputable builder in Hamilton, and that was demolished, and currently there's 4 townhouses being constructed there. Even Zelma and I just commented the other day independently that it really doesn't look a good look to the area. The other thing that worries us is the parking of vehicles, which has become a real issue within the streets. And of course, that's not just common to Hereford now. So as I say, the type of development should not be allowed in the area where there have been large family homes built and where there is a good community spirit. And as I said, residents, we just want to see it be designated as a historic heritage area. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. Mrs. Miller, John, we've got a question at the end, I think.
Good morning. My name is Thelma Miller, and I live at 8 Redford Place, which is a street or cul-de-sac running off Harrowfield Drive. And I read Martin's evidence and agree with the detail and adopt it.
Okay.
We live, might I point out, we live alongside a gully which creates both responsibilities and benefits. And the responsibilities are to not throw anything more rubbish, weeds, vegetation, cuttings or anything down there. And the benefits are increasing birdsong, tooing now on a daily basis. Just yesterday, every time I go out, and perhaps if I'm watering the bank, the tui seems to come from nowhere. So we have the tui, birdsong, incredible birdsong on a daily basis, and the occasional fantails, and less often a grey warbler. Once upon a time we used to have moorhawk every single night, but that is now hardly heard due to, in fact I did hear it the night before last, but it's very, very difficult to hear over time because of the increasing housing which is encroached and maybe predators as well. As I just said, I use a handheld hose and I regularly water the top of the gully and down as far as where the hose will reach in order to keep the area damp. And this is to encourage ferns and vegetation growth and protect the bank from erosion, and all of which of course encourages the bird life. And also regarding the bank and the gully, we've been active in possum control by trapping. We had a person come out and professionally do this. But we haven't continued this due to the cost. So we got 13 possums last year, for example. As Martin's pointed out, we're among the original residents of Harrowfield. We've been here since April '88. We were attracted to Harrowfield because of the size of the sections and very impressed with the way things seem to be going to be planned out. For example, the careful control of the housing size, the design, exercised by the developer, Mr. Graham Robinson. The subdivision has a number of special characteristics, as has been said. It has one way in. Main Street encircles the area with a number of cul-de-sacs radiating from it, and the encircling street is wide with 2 carriageways and has a central median planted in lawn and with ornamental trees. Section sizes are generous, the houses are large and individually designed mostly by architects. Many residents, there is a great camaraderie in the whole area, especially with the club, the Harrowfield Club. Many residents have lived here from the outset as we are one. We are one of about the first half dozen, in fact, there. And in fact, on that, I do remember the cows like grazing in the paddocks beyond us. It was that long ago. And people enjoy the membership of the Harrowfield Club, which actually owns the substantial amount of land. What is it, about 9?
6,000.
I think it's 4. Well, square.
9,000, yeah, sorry, 9,000.
Yeah, 9,000 square metres.
Yeah.
And this is an open space which has 2 tennis courts and a children's play area, and it's also the venue for a number of activities sponsored by the club each year. And there's all sorts of things that happen there, like at Easter, they have an Easter egg, kids' Easter egg hunting, all sorts of things like that. And also these Guy Fawkes night. It's a good little get-together, and other things that might happen during the year. There's a great spirit, great community up there, people are supportive. So in my view, the combination of these aspects gives the area a special character, and this needs to be protected from the possibility of further infill housing, which will have a deleterious effect on the suburb. And I know I'm not alone in seeking heritage status for Harrowfield, and I urge you please to recommend this to the Hamilton
to the council. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Mrs. Miller. Thank you.
Yes, I mean, I didn't know anything about Harrowfield until now, and I'm looking at everything, aerial photographs and the nature of the street and the lot sizes, and we haven't been there yet either drive-wise, but just using Google, driven up and down the street. So I mean, I can certainly see that it's got a special character about it.
That was
but
Graham
I just,
Robinson's
well,
vision.
yeah, and I also took a drive down Mystery Street, which I can see is plainly out of keeping and I think, to use your word, unfortunate.
You know what the residents call it?
Is it repeatable?
Misery place.
Right, okay. But what I haven't heard a lot about, there was probably a bit more yesterday, is actually heritage. And I just wonder whether, you know, Harrowfield falls into that sort of special character area as opposed to a place of heritage in the context of the categorisation and the types of qualities that we've heard about in relation to other heritage areas.
The area is now 37 years. When you're talking about heritage areas, what sort of time frame you're talking of?
Well, the council sort of put a stake in the ground at 1980, but I mean, other people have certainly argued that you know, needn't be a set time, and I mean, if you go forward, you know, well beyond when, you know, we're no longer around, it may well be a heritage area, and if you're going to make that call, when is the time to actually say that it is?
Yeah.
Yes. So, well, we'll certainly have a look at it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
If I may, I think it was Dr. Kai Gu who indicated that heritage doesn't have to be historic. It can be cultural. And if you look at Graham Robinson's vision and appended to Mr. Miller's evidence, there is a brochure which was published around about the same time. It's what it was advertising thing. You can see that there is a quality there that arises from the size of the site, the architecture and so on. And we think that's a cultural norm for the heritage, one of the heritage categories. And I think Dr. Kai Gu indicated that in his paper.
Yes.
Also substantiated to some extent by Mr. Mott's paper.
Just on that question, Dr. Bank, I note looking at the brochure there is no reference to covenants preventing subdivision, and there has been a consistent narrative about the suggestion there was an implied limitation, but clearly it isn't in the brochure. Is there any written confirmation of that?
My understanding as a relative newcomer to the area, be there 10 years, that it was my understanding that there were supposed to be covenants entered onto the titles. It's somewhat mysterious as to why that didn't happen, but it didn't. But even so, owners since have not indulged in any subdivision to any extent that I know about. So it's open at the moment, but we suspect that it's becoming a heritage area would hopefully prevent that sort of thing happening. Otherwise, it destroys the ambience of the suburb as a whole.
Thank you.
Yeah, Dom and I had, when we bought the section, we were dealing directly with Graham Robinson. And I think you've been with me there, he made it very clear that there was going to be some sort of caveat put onto the titles of the property. I have been on the committee for the last 20 years, and one of the owners actually felt his lawyer mentioned that something had been put on his title. But I've had that clarified. We had our lawyer investigate as to whether anything was put on our title. It certainly wasn't. But it was mentioned in the early part.
Yeah. I mean, the problem, of course, is intentions are all very well, but the reality is that they're not on the title by the sounds of it. So, yeah. Well, thank you very much for the presentation, both you and the residents yesterday, and we will certainly consider it and have a close look at your enclave in due course. So, thank you for coming today.
Thank you very much.
Right, I think we're going to take morning tea now. So, are we anticipating? We have what, 3 no-shows to date?
Linda Tiara will do it at 11:30.
11:30. She's coming at 11. Okay. Well, in that case, let's take a break until 11:30 then. We're back at 11:30 for Ms. Tiaho. Yes. Te aho?
Kia ora.
Right. Welcome, and what would you like to tell us?
Kia ora. My name's Linda Tiaho and I own a property on Fairview Street in Fairview Downs.
Morena tātou, I'm Leanne Muntz and I own 2 properties, 35 and 37 Fairview Street in Fairview Downs. Kia ora.
Kia ora. So in short, our submission is that we are always supportive of protecting heritage. In fact, we advocate for protecting heritage in a number of circumstances, but there's no heritage to be protected in Fairview Street and in the wider Fairview Downs area. And that's it in a nutshell, basically. So what I've done is just last night, just taken some photos from the internet of some of the houses down our street. This is number 1A Fairview Street. It's a very modern, new kind of pod type house. This is across the road and slightly to the right of our property at number 51. It's not one of those 70s buildings that I think it's Mr. Baker refers to in the original submission. I'm just going to flip through these photos just to show you the range of different styles in the one street that is evidence we think that there isn't this historic heritage to be protected. So here you've got a number 71 on the top. On the bottom left-hand side, that's number 17. That's a 2-storey brick house, not the original. And on the right-hand side at the bottom is number 33, which is next to Mrs. Muntz's property. And it's probably got that historic heritage type, those features, the wooden floors, etc. inside. But many of these houses have been renovated. This is the property that we own, it's number 51. It's a kind of a bungalow style. It's definitely not one of the types of houses that's referred to as having the heritage worthy of protecting. And so really that's our submission. Did you want to say anything else, Ali?
Yeah, so our properties were the weatherboard and beautiful native wood floors. However, you know, for us it's about having the freedom to be able to look at some development for our property. You know, with our elderly mothers, my husband and my mothers are looking at downgrading, so it's being able to give us the option for either them or for our children to actually develop or put something small on the property, given that, you know, trying to get on the property market for our kids these days isn't an easy thing. So it's about having that opportunity for our children and then also maybe for our parents. So one consideration for us is moving our weatherboard whare off the property and out to our marae, another option, housing option, to go back into our community for that connection back to the marae and to have the opportunity to actually build maybe a couple of smaller dwellings on there for either our parents or for our children to get on the property ladder.
And the only other thing that I'd add is that I think we've owned our houses for over 20-something years and we have no plans of going 3 up and 3 across. This is not about that for us. But similarly, in that house there, rather than sell it, it's been a family rental. I don't think I've ever had market rent from that house when my son was in it, my niece, etc. University students, just somewhere, as Leanne said, you know, there is a housing crisis and we're the solution to that housing crisis actually. And being able to have the right as a property owner to have freedom to build a duplex or something on that to increase the opportunities for our whānau, that's really what we're here to try and protect, is that property right as owners. That's it, that's us. Happy to take any questions.
Yep, thank you. Vicky?
E te tuatahi, kei aku mārei kura, tēnā kōrua. Aha ko kaore aku pātai ki a koe. E maioha atu ana mātou ki tō kōrua haringa mai ki konei kia kōrero ki a mātou.
Tēnā koe, me te parikoa te ki te ia koe ki tērā tahau te tia. Tēnā. Kia ora, Ewan.
Kia ora. So the question I have is it more about not being against HHAs, but the restrictive rule natures and the provisions that are currently being associated with the HHAs that are causing you those concerns?
Two things there. Not against historic heritage areas. Actually, one of the first houses that I grew up in was in Frankton. My father was a railway worker. So I know about the character of the Frankton railway cottages, and I'm supportive of that. But there's no heritage like that here. So if there was heritage like that here, if all of the houses were of that nature and it had that look and that feel, but I'm hoping that you can see just by the houses on one street in Fairview Downs that heritage doesn't exist there. So it's a fallacy. So that's one key point. The second key point too is that you know, we don't have plans to do the intensification as is proposed in the legislation, but and we understand why it's being proposed. But we still want to have the freedom to be able to do things without the barriers, which is a purpose of the legislation, right? To be able to have more freedom to increase the number of dwellings on one site without having to jump through so many hurdles.
Thank you.
Is that part of Fairview Downs that does have some sort of potential heritage value?
I actually, because we've owned our houses for over 20 years, and probably longer, and one of those houses also belongs to my sister who rents it out, so we were all living there, and not really, there might be pockets, you know, one or two of those old style houses, but there's been so much renovation or so much demolition and putting up of new houses that any character that may have once existed really has gone. And so I suspect that I don't know what the driver for the original submission might be. There might be a few of those houses still in existence that people want to protect, or it may be just a resistance against, you know, the intensification, and I completely understand that. But we feel, particularly for Fairview Street, that there's no historic heritage to be protected.
And where we live as well, the Wairere Drive is pretty much our backs onto us. So, you know, we were there when they had the green belt for a couple of decades, nearly 2 to 3 decades for us. 28 years we've been in our whare, our two whare, and across the road from us, one of our elderly ladies has been in there right from the beginning, and she was one of the very first brick homes. There's about 3 brick homes opposite us, so she's been in there for a number of decades now. But yeah, Linda's right. There was one house that I would, if I was to look at historic, it would be right down on the corner of Powell's Road and Wairere Drive, and it's kind of like a villa-like whare, which would be the only one that I would recognise that would be like the Hamilton East villas, etc. Right. And so we've been, like I said, we've been in our two whare for 28 years.
And we know the area. We know the general area around, not just Fairview Street, but the Raymond Street and those other streets. And they're similar to Fairview Street. There's been so much, you know, change. Yeah, and as Lee says, you know, we've got the highway behind this street here. So if you're looking there, immediately behind is Wairere Drive, which is the 4-lane expressway. So a lot of any of that old style character that may have once existed just doesn't exist anymore.
No questions for me, that's very clear, thank you.
All right, thank you both.
Thank
Appreciate
you.
your time.
Tēnā koutou. Kia ora.
All right, that's okay. Well, we have a number of no-shows, so that's the end of submitters for now. So back to you, Councillor.
Thank you. As discussed yesterday, we do have a supplementary statement from Mr. Knott. So I'll have that circulated and ask Mr. Knott to read that. And then perhaps at the end of that, there'll be, I'm sure, questions of Mr. Knott arising from his statement, but also yesterday you did signal that there may be some questions that you wanted to leave us with. It may be a good time for us to capture those questions that we take away as homework as well. We were thinking...
you won't be able to capture those. We're meeting on that next week.
I see, that's fine. I guess the point was we were thinking that we'd do everything we can to close out the HHA topic as much as we can today, and then shift to the 42A reporting on trees and SNAs. Right. Yeah.
Sure.
So should hopefully have a supplementary statement from Mr. Knott.
Yes, we do.
I'll ask him to to take you through it, it's probably appropriate to just commence at paragraph 5.
Yes, so starting at paragraph 5, so this obviously picks up points that were made yesterday and doesn't pick up any issues raised today. So if it's okay at the end, I might just double check through my highlights in my text from today as well, but I'm not sure whether there's much more to add, but I'll double check that.
Great.
So in terms of response to matters raised, firstly the relationship of special character areas and HHAs. A number of submitters who've presented evidence, including on prior days of the hearing, have discussed a continuum in which if an area does not qualify as an HHA, it falls to then consider whether it should be identified for its special character values. While some areas might fit within such a continuum, that will not always be the case. As covered in detail at the hearing, the historic heritage values of an area require consideration of whether the area contributes to an understanding and appreciation of New Zealand's history and cultures derived from a number of qualities. I agree with Mr Miller's view that in the case of an HHA, those values are most likely to relate to the architectural and historic values of the area, but accept that the archaeological, cultural, scientific and technological values of the area may also contribute. Special character values of an area relate to the amenity values of the area, and in particular the pleasantness and aesthetic coherence of the area. These may be very different to any historic heritage values that an area exhibits. I do not believe that these values always overlap or provide a continuum from any historic heritage values of an area. So now on paragraph 9, using an example that I know the panel has already visited, the Oxford Street West and Marshall Street HHA has been identified as being of heritage significance as representing the late Victorian and Edwardian and during and after the interwar development period, with the values of the area including that it illustrates the continued growth of the city, the remaining small dwellings, and the relatively unaltered development pattern. However, were the panel to find that the area did not exhibit sufficient historic heritage values to be identified as an HHA, I do not believe the area exhibits sufficient aesthetic coherence and qualities that it should alternatively be identified as a special character area. Accordingly, it cannot be assumed that all identified HHAs will automatically qualify as a special character area if the panel's assessment concludes that historic heritage values are not present. The second matter is whether bespoke rules should be prepared for each HHA. A number of submitters spoke of the success of the existing rule framework, and in particular that to Hayes Paddock. This led to discussions to whether bespoke rules were needed for individual HHAs to better respond to the values of each. Much of this discussion related to the ability to erect buildings within rear yard areas and to alter the rear of buildings as permitted activity. There was also discussion regarding the need for heritage impact assessments. Mr Thode indicated that he had some concerns with the idea of bespoke provisions and that this could result in a lengthy, complex chapter in the district plan. He considered that the statements for each HHA could be used as an alternative response to this matter. I agree. Other submitters also discussed the complexity of the assessment criteria, and in particular E1, which applies to all historic heritage matters. I consider that to progress this matter, consideration could be given to, and I'll run through these, A, introducing a rule to allow the maintenance and repair of buildings and HHAs. B, reconsidering the words of the rules in 19.3.2 to allow greater scope for sheds and accessory buildings and alterations and additions to the rear of existing buildings as a permitted activity. This may include considering such matters as the height of accessory buildings and additions to ensure that they are not visible beyond or above the original building. C, providing further clarity regarding the preparation of HIAs, including who they should be prepared by, their content and size, as already discussed on previous days of the hearing. And D, consideration as to whether the E1 assessment criteria should apply to HHAs. And finally, E, further reviewing the statements for each HHA to ensure that they better explain the values and key design features of each HHA. Overall, I consider that rather than a set of bespoke rules for each HHA, the better and more efficient approach is a consistent set of rules across all HHAs, but with each HHA having their bespoke and well-articulated historic heritage values that require protection from application of the rules. More work has been done to these HHA descriptions to ensure a clearly articulated set of values are easily identifiable in the operative district plan, and examples of updated statements have been prepared for Acacia Avenue and Seifert Street. So I've prepared that for you. And this was actually, I started preparing this a couple of days ago in response